Hello, today I'd like to talk to you about playing our bishop to f4 move against king Fianchetto defences. A different set of defences than we've looked at before. And bishop to f4 is a pretty good plan against all of them. There's three king Fianchetto defences to look at. The Benoni, the King's Indian, and the Grunfeld, or the Grunfeld Indian as it's sometimes called, Grunfeld defence. After d4, knight f6, this is you can continue quite happily with c4 here, although knight f3 might get you back into some Queen's Gambit lines if black chooses to play d5 here. And now g6 commits black to some sort of king Fianchetto. Now it's perfectly possible here to reply bishop to f4 when we get different sorts of systems to the ones that I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at systems with c4. Systems with bishop to f4 include the London system, which you can find all over the internet, and the systems that are called things like the Barry attack and so on, where white intends to play knight to c3 and e4. But we'll continue with our consistent approach, same sort of setup with c4. And now d6 is the King's Indian, d5 is the Grunfeld, and c5 is the Benoni. And we'll look at each of those in turn. Having put the Benoni on the board, let's look at this first. The best move to play here to keep it into Queen's pawn opening lines is d5. And now e6 intends to swap off the centre pawns and create a bit of imbalance in the position, and give black some fighting chances. Knight c3 takes d6, and now a perfectly strong system for white here, which scores rather well, I think, is bishop to f4. We're going to continue with e3 and h3, just playing very solidly in the centre and hoping to make use of some of black's weaknesses. There's a weakness here on d6, which is a good thing to have a go at, and there are other lines to try and keep control of black's position. I think normal development here for black, if they just play normal Benoni sorts of moves, if they've only just started playing the Benoni and that's all that they know, then I think you're very likely to get a very good position. Normal Benoni moves don't work very well against this type of line. And the main line played by the Grandmasters goes something like a6, and then we'll clamp down on that with a4, and after bishop to g7 we'll hang on to our bishop with h3, so that gives a spot for the bishop to retreat to from the f4 square. It can go back to h2 if need be, but also it stops the black bishop coming to g4. Now h3 is a sort of move that I often criticise when it's played by juniors, and rightly so, because it's usually a waste of time and a bit too slow, but here it turns out to be quite a good idea. It's got 2 points behind it, and in fact the bishop often finds it hard to find a different square. If you think about where else that black bishop is going to go, it's not very happy on f5, because white may well play e4, and d7 doesn't look like much of a square because it's in the way of the other black knight. So h3 is a good idea, castles and e3, and this is the basic setup that we're going for as white. And now again, it's not a move that black will play unless they know the line, I think, but queen to e7, it's very early for black to start playing with the queen rather than the other piece, but there's because white's been a bit slow in getting castled, there's a possibility of playing things like knight to h5 or f5 to f4, taking advantage of the pin down the e file. So there's best move here for white is to play bishop to e2, and now knight bd7, castles, and is all very logical. And now black's going to try and get their position sorted out with a move like knight to e8, and that threatens to get the f4 underway, although it's not a terribly comfortable position for the knight. The knight probably will also come across to c7, and then it's supporting the b5 idea. And in this position, white's got a couple of approaches. You probably tend to put your pieces on the same sorts of squares. Knight to d2 makes a lot of sense, coming to, if we can, the c4 square when it hits the pawn on d6, and also takes advantage of some of these holes over on the king side. So knight d2 is a very good idea. Also rook e1 makes perfect sense if black's going to start messing about with moves like f5 and f4. We'll put the rook opposite the queen. So one line that I came across, rook to b8, knight d2, coming across to c4 again. Now knight e5, it intends to swap off our knight if it comes to c4, and just playing quietly for white, bishop to g3, so we can threaten f4, driving the knight away. Knight to c7 as promised, and now a5 is probably the best move. And after b5 takes and takes, black's got quite a flexible position. It's got a decent square for most of their pieces, but actually is full of holes. And what we're hoping is that as the game goes on, queen c2 here, I think it's probably important to hang on to that e pawn, the b pawn. White is hoping that as the game goes on and more swaps happen, that all of these weaknesses here from in black's position will start to be important. Obviously, we've also got a weakness of our own down here on b2, which black's going to try and make use of, but black's not so has not got so much space. Another plan for white here, as well as poking at the weaknesses, is the traditional plan in these positions, is to try and get e4, f4 and e5 in. It's quite hard to keep black cramped down over the whole board, but that's just be prepared to meet black where they want to play, and hopefully you'll get the hang of the position. So that's a little line after rook e1. After knight to d2, one example game, knight e5, bishop h2. These are all familiar sorts of plan for both sides. f5, queen c2, rook b8. We've seen most of these moves before. Bishop d7 this time, rook ae1, putting the other rook opposite the queen, and now black went for a bit more activity with g5. I think actually if you do meet the Benoni at junior level, this is more the style in which they're going to play. You know, trying to knock you out and being very busy and active with their position. But I think we're okay. f4 in this position, and black doesn't really want to open up the e file, so they drop the knight back to g6, king h1, and now g takes f4. Actually, they did exactly that. Couldn't stand the tension anymore, and gets the queen off the e file with queen to f7, bishop to d3 by white. Now black's position is absolutely full of holes. You can see all these weak pawns appearing. Another couple of just turned up on f5 and h7. So almost all black's pawns are weak. So knight h4 here by black, trying to be active. So we're just going to poke away at these weaknesses. Knight to c4, bishop to b5, rook e6. The moment that black takes their eye off the e6 square, we can go and poke our nose in it. Takes, rook fe1, knight g6, knight to a4. You can see how these weaknesses now for black are really starting to hurt. And after knight to c7, we've got this amusing idea of taking on c5 now for white, and if black decides to take the knight with d takes c5, then d5 to d6, opening up the diagonal leading across to the king and queen is going to be deadly. So black didn't do that. After knight takes c5, they took the rook on e6, and after d takes e6, black's got similar sorts of problems. Queen e7 and knight d7. Rook fe8 just hanging on to material, but this position's a train wreck for black. Queen takes f5, rook to e2, just holding on to things with b3. d5 is sort of lashing out a bit. Takes on d5. The queen trying to create some trouble on the back rank maybe. Rook e1, queen b4, rook f1, queen h5, and bishop to d3. And the black king side's falling in. So a really nice game there by a chap called Donchenko against Vilvok, so I do apologise, from Maastricht in 2018. And so I mean, it's not that's forced obviously, but that's a style of play in which you're trying to win against the modern Benoni. So we'll if we look further on in with this sort of approach, so knight c4, and black might disguise their intentions a little bit with bishop to g7, and now knight to c3 at castles, bishop to f4 we can play, and now as I say d6 is a King's Indian, d5 a Grunfeld. The main lines of the Grunfeld, I mean this is a mainline position, and I guess if again, unless black's only just started playing the Grunfeld, they should know the main lines. Rook c1, black takes, trying to be a nuisance, e4, and now two lines here. There's c5 when we take, and queen a5 here for black. Going to pick the c5 pawn up. E5, rook d8, little intermezzo. Bishop d2, knight g4. It's all rather complicated, isn't it? Bishop takes c4, queen takes c5, and now knight e4 hits the queen and protects the bishop. Queen to b6, and now well, almost anything could happen here, but one line is takes on f7 check. How about that? Takes on f7, takes on c8, takes on c8. So we've actually given up an exchange here for white. Knight to g5 check, and queen takes g4, so we've got two pieces for the exchange, so that's not too bad. Queen to c6, knight to d6, hoping to get in a check on e6, queen to d7, queen to h4, knight takes c8, check, and we've got our exchange back, and this is not a bad position at all. This is a game played a long while ago actually by Zhirchikashvili against Gutman in 72. So complicated sort of game, maybe the sort of game that a Grunfeld player will want, but that particular game turned out very well for black. Instead of here c5, the other line is bishop to g4, takes, and knight to h5, coming back to e3, and now takes on f3, and if we take on f3 with the queen we're going to lose the d pawn, so g takes, and black's trying to make a big mess of our nice big centre. Takes and takes, and we're in an end game. Castles to look after the h pawn. Knight to c6, and this position I guess is about equal. Knight to d5, trying to create a bit more play. We're sacrificing the b pawn and then chasing the bishop around. So we've sacrificed a pawn here as white, but to get nicely active. So we've got the two bishops breathing fire. Nice line for the rook. So black's rather passive and pieces aren't on great squares. Bishop to e2 by white. Knight g7, and now we can pick up our pawn with rook takes b7. Knight to e6, e5, trying to squash the black pieces again. And now knight takes c7. We have some swappers on c8, rook d1. So we've got a position where we've got an extra pawn, although our pawns are a bit messy, and we also have the two bishops. So this endgame is quite good for white. And as the game continued, we had it actually finished very quickly here after bishop c1, trying to round up our f pawn. So we'll sacrifice the f pawn. But now bishop to h5, and black resigned here. It's very difficult to hang on to all of black's pawns and all of, and as well as the black king side. So a nice little game there by Anastasian against Holmston from Linares 2000. So that's a system against the Grunfeld. Against the King's Indian with d6. This isn't a big Grandmaster system, and it isn't very well known, particularly not by this move order. And we'll hang on to our bishop with h3. Knight bd7 is a very natural King's Indian move, and e3. So this is the sort of position these are sorts of moves that we play against everything. And now if rook to e8, planning a typical e5 break by black, just bishop e2, and now if they follow through with e5, we're actually winning a pawn here, because after knight takes e5, well, if black takes back with knight takes on e5 there, then we'll just take on d8 and e5, and we've won our pawn. If instead, after knight takes e5, black tries something like knight to h5, hitting our bishop with the hope of being able to get the pawn back, I think just here bishop takes h5, and there is some messiness in this position, but you know, what white seems to me to be a pawn up with few problems. So if black wants to get in this e5 move, they have to play queen to e8 and not rook to e8. So they're out of any problems on the d file. So we'll just play bishop e2 again. And if e5, we drop the bishop back to h2. Black tries to get their back rank sorted out with queen e7, and we castle. And now e4, hoping to play in the style of the King's Indian. Knight d2, rook e8, all very natural. And now there's a choice of approaches here. One sensible looking game went queen c2, and now knight to d5, and after takes and takes we've got some pressure down the c file. Bishop f4, g4, let's get rid of that one straight away. Queen c7, and you know, we've got an extra pawn which is going to be hard for black to justify. Rook c2, bishop b4, and now the rook's in danger of getting lost on the king side, on the queen side, if it takes the b pawn. So it wants some sort of escape route. Rook e to c8 was played here. Rook a b1 protecting the b pawn. f5, bishop d1 chasing the rook away. Rook to c1 takes. Bishop e2. Rook c8, rook b1, and black resigned. You know, just a simple pawn up here, and oh, sorry, we're actually two pawns up for the moment. I'm assuming we're going to lose one at some point. And this is just a really nice position for white. This is a game between Topolevsky and Sturber from Germany in 2010. Not top ranked players, but maybe typical of the sort of play that you will see in the London system. You know, black's demonstrations on the king side didn't come to anything, and white's pressure on the queen side was really rather strong, and we broke through on c7. A better known game by a better known player after rook e8 was to play here knight to b5, obviously trying to be irritating on c7 as usual. Queen d8, and now c5, and you can see all the pressure on these queenside points here on these queenside pawns of blacks are really under pressure. So black tried to chase the knight away with a6, but now white showed their class. This is Boris Spassky as white against Grandmaster Bukic. takes on c6, takes on b5, takes on c7. So we've got two pieces for two pawns for the piece, but this pawn on c7 is going to be an absolute monster, and we still have strong domination of the diagonal from this bishop hiding away on h2. So it's we've got positional compensation for the missing value of a pawn, or if you like it, we've paid a pawn's worth of material in order to get this very nice position. And there's the pawn back for us. So we've got full value for the piece and a strong bind, and this game went very smoothly from here on in for white. As usual, I'm playing through the moves very quickly just to get a feel for the game rather than anything you're going to try and remember. But feel free to play this over slowly. It'll be in the notes later on, so that you can go over it in your own time if you want to look at the detail. But the overall impression of this game, I think you'll agree, is rather striking. Black's trying to push back in the middle, but it rather feels as though Black's surrounded. So we'll swap in order to get the queen in. We're obviously very happy with to move towards an end game with our 3 pawns. Black wants to swap on their own terms. Bishop to g3 to protect f2, and now we're advancing on all fronts at the moment as white. b4, and these pawns are just going to roll through the black position. Black's obviously trying to create some counterplay, but they're really only trying to do it with 1 or 2 pieces, not enough to win a game with. And in this position, I think white can more or less do what they like. Black's position is just completely passive and lost. And in order to wrap things up, white's decided to open up a file on the king side, which is what black's been trying to do all game. Rather amusing. And now the f file became open. We're chasing the black queen around a bit. There's d6, which has been in the post for a while, locking in white's advantage and blocking out the black pieces. Rook a6, and here comes another pawn with e4. Little spite check, really means don't know what to do. And now we attack on f7, and after knight to f6, white just knocked the piece out of the equation, and white's going to push forward with moves like after either the rook or the queen takes on f6, bishop to e5 is very strong. E5 is also strong. I mean, white can win this game more or less as they wish. Knight e5 might be in the post, knight e5, and then d7. d7 wins a piece almost straight away. So white can win this with lots of different ideas depending on black's defence. So that's a game between Spassky and Bukic from '78, very well known game to fans of the London system. I think that's more or less all you need to know for these systems. The only other fiddle that I might warn you about is in the Benoni after d5. I showed you immediate transition to the modern Benoni. The modern Benoni is where you have this e6 idea and a swap. Black doesn't have to play that early. They can hold that back and just to see what you're going to do. So after knight c3, bishop g7, well, if you play bishop to f4 here, which is in keeping with our system, then it may be that black can play knight h5 and be annoying, or they might play might try and arrange e5 and be annoying. So we'll play a move that's useful in most systems, which is h3. But now if black castles, well, we don't want to play bishop to f4 necessarily, and we don't want to play e3 certainly and block the bishop in, so we might have to play a different system, something like the one with e4. And now if black doesn't take control of something, we can continue with moves like just put your bishops on e3 and d3, and maybe play g4 and just bash through on the king side. So this might be a good moment for black to open up things for themselves with e6, bishop to d3. Now after e5, actually you've got a choice of captures here. I think e takes d5 is a perfectly sound system for white. It's not very dynamic because the pawns are symmetrical in a sense, but that's an okay way for white to play. C takes d5 is more active, and the main line of this position goes b5, which is an ingenious move by black. The idea being that after knight takes b5, rook e8, black's going to win either the pawn on d5 because of the pin, or the pin on, or the pawn on e4. I think the main line now is castles. Knight takes e4, rook e1, and now black usually chases the knight away with a6. And there's a pawn sacrifice here. You can play with knight c3, and this line is okay for white. I mean, black's just got too many weak pawns for this to be comfortable, and we can look forward to ganging up on the d6 pawn or the a6 pawn. Maybe it's still equal after you get your pawn back, but I wouldn't be frightened of losing a pawn here. Instead, knight to a3, knight f6, and swaps. And again, this is quite a comfortable sort of position for white. I haven't got an example game up my sleeve for this, but the same sorts of ideas and principles apply. We've got a better opportunity to play moves like knight to c4 here, obviously, which looks like an obvious try for white. We've also got to be a little bit more wary because we've got our d pawn, which is usually a big strong asset, and probably is here too, but actually has become isolated. And this is a position well known to theory. I think white still wins the majority of these encounters, but actually modern Benoni theory has moved on. And if you play a system with bishop to d3 these days, you usually wait with the knight coming to f3. The biggest system in the modern Benoni these days is to play bishop to d3 and knight ge2. Anyhow, plenty of ideas there for a bishop f4 player, but using bishop to f4, not in the London system version without c4, but using bishop f4 with c4. There you go.